Hi, this is needlepointers.com, and today I'd like to show you this great project that I found. This is by Anita Goodesign, and it's their wine charms and coasters package. This package makes all these cute coasters that are fruit and vegetable shapes, and they stitch out in the hoop. For this video, I'm going to show you how to make some of the different types of these coasters and wine charms. For more pictures of this project and instructions and a place to purchase this DVD or CD with the designs on it, you can click on the iCard or go to the link that's in the description of this video. You can also buy the CD at your local quilt store. So this is the wine charm put onto a glass, so it just passes. It's got a loop that is stitched during the pattern, and it just passes through your wine glass, around your wine glass. So these are the different ones that I've made. So most of the steps are basic steps are the same for all the different ones, but some have different appliques or different stitching involved. So I've taken you through how to make all of these, and the rest of the 15 that are on the DVD or CD are pretty much the same as one of these, so I'm not going to show you every single one. So we'll get started making these different ones. I will put in the description of the video the start point of each one of these that I'm demonstrating, so that if you want to jump just to a certain one, if you have a question about it, then you can just jump to it and get there quickly and not have to watch the whole video and wonder where it is. I just wanted to show you here. I tried my first one, and it was the lemon, as you can see, and you can see here the fabric actually pulled away from the stitching. This happened, I think, for a couple of reasons. One, I'm using this thinner Solvay water-soluble stabilizer, and also I think I might have trimmed too close to the stitching at the beginning. So, and there's a lot of dense stitching in the middle on these three. So I think what's happening was when it was stitching, it ended up pulling the fabric, and it pulled it out of the stitches. So when I do it this time, I am not going to cut around the outside until after all of this stitching is done. And that way it should hold it in place better and not do this. The other thing I have also used for the subsequent, this two that I've done so far, I'm using a different stabilizer. This was the original stabilizer I used, which is Solvay water-soluble stabilizer, and it's pretty thin. So what I've been using, I find that this Ultra Solvay stabilizer is much thicker. Maybe you can see it's very thick, and I'm using this one instead. Now, even with using this one, sometimes when it's sewing the final satin stitch around the outside, it can start separating and cutting the whole thing out. And what you can do is, if that starts happening, is you can stop your machine, and then you can cut a piece of the stabilizer and slide it underneath, and that will give it another layer, and hopefully it will keep it from separating too much and coming out. So this is the lemon one that I did already, and so I'm going to show you the lime, which is very similar. So the first step is to just hoop your Solvay water-soluble stabilizer. Okay, so I've hooped my water-soluble stabilizer, and I have loaded my design, and the first step is to stitch the placement stitch for the piece of fabric. So I'm going to stitch that. Next step is to place the fabric down. Okay, so it's stitched around the line it's really the cutting line for the fabric, but I'm going to leave it uncut for right now until I get all the inner dent stitching finished, and so it won't pull away and separate from there like it did in the one I showed you. So we're going to start stitching, and I will be back after it's done. I'm done stitching all the embroidery stitches. Okay, as you can see, I have all the embroidery done for this line, and the next step is to sew the back on. So I've cut a piece of fabric for the back and a piece of Plum batting, and I'm going to just slide that underneath and then stitch around the outside. Okay, so that stitching is done, and so now I'm going to trim closely around the stitching on the top and the bottom of this, and then the final stitch for the coaster will be the satin stitch around the outside, and I'll be back after that. Okay, so now I've finished the satin stitching around the outside of this. The next step is to stitch the line of where to place the fabric for the wine charm. Okay, so there's the outline, and I'm going to place the fabric for the wine charm over top and stitch the tack down stitch. The next step is to trim around the outside of the wine charm, so I'll do that, and then after that will be to stitch some embroidery stitches on the wine charm. So I'm going to do those steps. After I did the embroidery stitches, the next step was to take the backing fabric and a piece of Plum or batting, and I slid that underneath, and then I stitched the final stitches on here. So this one is now completed. Okay, so for finishing this, you now have to get the water-soluble stabilizer off, and usually it tears off pretty cleanly around the outside of the coaster, and then you can tear out it around the wine charm. So there's a little wine charm in the back coaster. The next wine charm and coaster pair that I'm going to work on is the plum, and so the first step in the plum is to stitch the outline for the back fabric. If the fabric is creased, I also will iron it. So I'm now going to place that down and sew the cutting stitch. Now I'm going to cut around close to the cutting line and trim this. Okay, so the next stitch here is to the placement line for the other piece of fabric. So I'm going to stitch that. So next I'm going to cut the piece of fabric, place it over top of this, and stitch the cutting line, and then I'm going to trim the fabric. As you can see, I stitched and then I trimmed around the edge of the second piece. The next few stitches are just embroidery stitches, so I'm going to go through and do all of those stitches because there's nothing special about doing those, and you just pick the colors you want and sew. Okay, so I did the highlight stitch here and the in-between stitch here. The next step is to put the backing fabric on. So I have cut a piece of backing fabric and a piece of Plum for batting, and sliding that underneath. And then I'm going to stitch the stitch to put those together. Oh, and at this point I've also changed my bobbin thread to match my outline stitch, because when we do the satin stitch on top, it will the bobbin thread will show on the back of the coaster, so we want to keep it the same color. Okay, so that was completed. So the next step is to take the hoop out and turn it over, and I'm going to trim close to the stitching on the back. Okay, I trimmed the back, and the next few steps are satin stitch around the outside here, and then the leaves and stem for the plum. So I'll be back after I finish those things. Okay, so the plum coaster is completed, so now we're going to continue on to the wine charm. The first step in the wine charm is to do the outline stitch for the where you place the fabric. Okay, so there's the placement stitch for the fabric, and I'm going to place a piece of fabric over top and place the tack down stitch, the cutting line actually, and tack down stitch. Okay, so I've cut around the edge, and the next few stitches are embroidery stitches, so I'm going to just continue with those until we get to the next point where I want to show you. Okay, so now it's finished stitching the highlights in the little loop, and the next step is to put the backing fabric on with the pellon or batting. So I'm going to slide that underneath and then just stitch that, and I will trim around there and then do the last few stitches to finish this up. Okay, as you can see, I cut close to the stitching line, and now I am going to do the last few stitches, which is around the outside and the leaves. And the wine charm is now finished. My next one is the watermelon, and I started to do this one and I actually messed it up the first time. You would think you put the green background down first, but the way that the pattern works is that you put the red fabric for the foreground fabric down first in the middle, and then you put the green background fabric down. So I'm going to stitch the first stitch, which is the placement stitch for the red fabric. So now I'm going to place the fabric for the middle of the watermelon, the red part, and place the tack down stitch for that. So I've trimmed around the fabric, and the next stitch is the placement stitch for the green fabric, which is around the outside. So now I'm going to place the green fabric down, and then I am going to do the tack down stitch for the green fabric, and then I'll trim it, and we'll be trimming inside in the middle of the circle and around the outside. The next stitch is to sew the satin stitch around the outside, and then we'll be sewing the seeds on the inside of the watermelon. I'll be back after those stitches are complete. The next step puts the background fabric on, the backing fabric. So I'm going to slide the backing fabric and a layer of pellon or batting behind, upside down behind there, and then we'll stitch that down. Okay, don't forget, for these steps we want to have the matching bobbin thread, because when it does the step after this one where it does the satin stitch around the outside, it's going to show on the back, so you want to have matching bobbin thread at this point. I finished the satin stitch around the coaster, and I did the next stitch, which is this placement stitch for the fabric for the wine charm. So I'm placing the fabric down, and I'll continue with that. So as you can see, I have the tack down stitch done, and I'm going to have to trim around the outside of this, and then the next stitches are to do the loop and to do some decorative stitches on the wine charm. So I'll be back after those are done. So as you can see, the loop and the decorative stitches have been finished on the wine charm. And now I'm going to slide the background fabric and the pellon behind the wine charm and do the stitch down of that, the trimming, and then the final stitching around the outside. So that finishes up the wine charm and watermelon coaster. So the next wine charm and coaster pair that I'm going to work on is the raspberry. The raspberry is a little bit different. It has a background fabric that's in sections, and then it has a foreground fabric. So the first step is to stitch down the placement stitches for the background fabric. Alright, I had stitched the placement stitch in a white so you wouldn't have been able to see it, unfortunately, so I decided to just continue on, and I put the fabric over and then stitch down the tack down stitch, and I've also now trimmed around everything. So the next stitch is going to stitch down the placement line for the second fabric color. Okay, the placement stitch is down, and so I'm going to put the second color fabric I'm going to use, and I'm going to stitch the tack down stitch. The next two stitches are going to stitch some seeds and stuff on the inside here, so I'm going to stitch those before I trim around the outside. Okay, as you can see, I've stitched the colors on the top, and I've now trimmed around. The next colors will stitch some leaves and stuff up here, so I'll be back after those are finished. Alright, so it's stitched one leaf, and now it's going to put the backing fabric on. So I have the backing fabric here along with the pellon, and I'm going to slide that underneath and stitch the tack down or cutting stitch. Okay, I stitched the tack down stitch and I trimmed the back fabric, as you can see, and the next step is to embroider around the outside on the darker fabric. At this point I've switched the bobbin thread to match the top thread or to match the fabric, so that because the bobbin thread will show on the back now that we've put the back on. So I'll be back in a little bit. Alright, that one has a lot of stitching to do all these leaves here. So the coaster is all finished now. The next step will be to sew the placement stitch for the wine charm. I've stitched the placement stitch for the wine charm, and I'm going to put the first piece of fabric down over top that, and then I will continue with stitching the cutout stitch and the next color fabric. So I was wrong that there isn't two different color fabrics on the wine charm. There's just the one background fabric, and then you embroider the little lines and the dots on here. So when you're doing this, you might want to, you can use either fabric, but you might want to use your foreground or you might want to use your background. I use my background fabric. And so the next step after it embroidered all of the loop and the dots and the leaves is to now put the backing fabric on with the pellon. So I'm going to slide that underneath, and then I'm going to continue to sew the tack down stitch for this, and then you trim around the back background fabric, and then you continue with the last few satin stitch around the outside and some leaves. So I'll be back after that. And after you trim, don't forget to change your bobbin thread back to a matching color thread so that it looks nice on the back too. Here's the completed raspberry and coaster wine charm. The next one I'm going to do is the tomato, and the tomato has one applique fabric on it, and the same is for the apple, the pineapple, and the artichoke. So this one will represent all three of those. You basically have one applique fabric that's going to go down on them and trimmed around, and then there's just different stitching of different color threads. So I will start this one with the outline stitch to show where to place the background fabric. Okay, so it might be hard to see here, but I did the placement stitch. I placed my fabric down. I did the tack down stitch around the outside. I'm not trimming it yet until I'm closer to needing to trim it, so that when it does the embroidery in the inside, it won't pull away. So I've also stitched the placement stitch for the center fabric, and so now I'm going to place the center fabric down and then stitch the cut stitch for that, and then I will cut it after that. I'll trim around the cutting stitch. So you can see here I've trimmed the fabric along the cutting line, and so now I'm going to put it back in, and I'll be sewing some of the other stitches, the seeds and some other things that come after that, till I get to the next step that I want to show you. The next step is to put the backing fabric and the pellon underneath. So I'm going to stick those underneath and then stitch the tack down stitch, and I'll now trim on the front and the back. There's the finished tomato coaster. It stitched the satin stitch around the outside, and then I finished with these leaves at the top. So the next step is to stitch the placement stitch for the wine coaster. So then I placed the fabric down for the wine tag and did the cutting stitch around the outside. The next few stitches are just stitching highlights and the loop. Okay, so now the next step is to put the backing fabric and the pellon underneath. So I'm going to slide that underneath and stitch the tack down stitch. Then I'll be trimming around the outside and then stitching the last two stitches. Here's the finished tomato and coaster wine charm. I hope you enjoyed this video on how to make these coasters and wine charms by Anita Goodesign. Please like, share, and comment. Subscribe to our channel because we publish new crafting videos on Mondays and Thursdays. On Saturdays, we post quick tip videos and share our personal craft projects. Check out our website, needlepointers.com, for more embroidery, machine embroidery projects.